and kind of understand how the British come to dominate in that continent, right? A very large geographic region. The British kind of come to dominate and eventually come to influence as well. And just to kind of remind us, we talked about this kind of in a few lecture videos ago. The Mughal Empire, right, which who was ruling over India when the British first arrived, and they are a Muslim ruling class controlling a Hindu majority population. So that's going to cause tension between the rulers and the ruled. So the origins of British imperialism date back pretty far. So you have the British East India Trading Company, who begins trading in India in the 1500s. They were a stock company, which meant that different investors put money into it, so they owned a stock or share of it, and then whatever profit the company made, that profit was divided among shareholders. It was a company that was created by the British government, so essentially this company, the British East India Trading Company, had a monopoly over business in India, because they were dealt with kind of the East Indies, right, the Asian part of the world, whereas the British West Indian Trading Company would have access of the Americas, right? So it was a stock company that was a monopoly that had complete control over what was trading-wise, what was happening in India. As the Mughal Empire declines, the British East India Trading Company increases their influence, right? Comes to kind of rule a little, more intensely. India is a very diverse, even to this day, is a very diverse place. It's a very large area as well. A lot of times, India is referred to as the subcontinent because it's not quite a continent, but it's this huge piece of land. That nowadays the Indian subcontinent would also include Pakistan, but India as a nation today, right, has dozens of languages. I don't know the exact number, but there are several national languages of India, and so this could very well benefit, right, the British, right. There's Muslim regions, there's Hindu regions. With the arrival of the British and before them the Portuguese, there are Christian regions. Actually, the Portuguese arrive, and there's already kind of a Christian presence in India, right? The legend goes that the Apostle Thomas went to India to preach, right? So the history of Christianity in India is very old as well. The British take advantage of this diversity by playing each of the different states or groups off of each other, right? So they might say to one group, "We'll help you out if you give us this," right? And they cause conflict, and they cause tension, and they take advantage of that for their own benefit. Ultimately, the goal of the British East India Trading Company is to make a profit. They are a company, they have investors who are expecting money. And so they do lots of things to kind of help modernize or westernize India. Now, we're fast forwarding a bit, we're not in the 1500s anymore, but as we get into the 1800s, they begin to develop road networks, railroads, and they build telegraph wires, right? So they're kind of building the infrastructure needed in India to make a profit off of it. And while this was meant to make a profit, in the long run, it does have positive consequences for the Indians living there as well. They kind of get to experience and use these things for their own benefits as well. Over time, though, once they for a while they try to keep the peace among rival. They try to play each nation off each other, different states or ethnicities off of each other. But their job now is also to keep the peace, right? Because eventually it becomes necessary for the British to keep the peace. Otherwise, their economic stability is being threatened, right? Their economic profits are being threatened. At the same time, Christian missionaries arrive, so we know there's already a Christian presence in India, but now we have some Protestant Christians with the English coming in. And all these things kind of help contribute to an even more rigidness of the caste system. If you remember the caste system from last year, it was kind of a religious, political, economic structure that classified groups based on their employment, essentially. Right, but there was an added weight to it because that was you were believed to be born to the caste that you earned through the Hindu belief of karma, right? That in the previous life, however you lived, that influences now what life you're in this current life. And so there was a really strict sense of you can't move out of your caste because that's where you're supposed to be. You can't marry other caste members because then you're diluting, or harming other people, right? So it really was a very rigid system to begin with. And in the British East Indian Company, in this effort to make profits and kind of help, in order to do that, they have to kind of rely on the wealthier Indians who are already there, right? So it kind of formally or makes even more rigid this caste system. In 1858, there's something called the Sepoy Rebellion, which we're going to talk about in a few slides. But essentially what this does is it forces the British in 1858 to remove the British East India Trading Company, and the British government takes control of India. And they rule kind of directly, right, with the British Raj, who was a viceroy or essentially a representative of the Queen. At the time, the Queen was Queen Victoria. And so most places the British actually rule indirectly. In India, after the British East Indian Company and the Sepoy Rebellion, after then, the British then take on a direct rule in India, which is different than how they've treated other colonized regions. With the creation of the Suez Canal, the trading volume increases between Europe and India, which benefits the British, to some extent some Indians, but also causes kind of this industrialization of India, right, where you have a lot of poor working class people. Over time, the British kind of enact certain reforms to Indian culture that they saw kind of as, one in particular they saw as kind of barbaric, which is the ritual of sati. And this was a belief, and it was not a very common practice, especially by the time the British are taking control. It's not nearly as common as it maybe once was. And it was only for a certain caste, right, the high caste level woman. And this ritual is where the widow then would, when their husband died and their body was being burned on a funeral pyre, the woman would throw their bodies, a living woman would throw their bodies onto the pyre and burn themselves to death, right? Because they had to be with their husbands, right? This was kind of an extreme practice. Again, not very common, but it was formally banned by the British during this time period. They also began to introduce Western education and philosophy. Some British people really embraced Eastern cosmology, right? Buddhism and Hinduism, but many others kind of ridiculed it and try to force kind of the Western Christian, Judeo-Christian philosophy onto people. Right, all these things kind of lead to a rise in Indian nationalism. So we talked about how there were so many different ethnic groups and different language groups in India, but this kind of shared common experience of the British ruling over them helps to form this sense of Indian nationhood. It's not perfect, right? You would say there's tension between different groups, but it kind of helps form a common identity that is then going to encourage Indians to resist British control. So we mentioned in a couple slides previously the Sepoy Rebellion, which is a really important moment because it gives the British Crown direct control over India. So Sepoy was the name of the Indian soldiers who were employed by the British East Indian Company, almost like a private police force. All right, and then these soldiers were largely Hindu and Muslims because that's what was largely in this region of India. There was resentment between the Sepoys and the British. Rulers and ruled people, they don't like that they have to listen to these kind of white Europeans when they're native to this region. There was a breaking point, though, when the British introduced new gun cartridges. The bullets would be stored in before you use them. And the casings were made out of cow and pig fat. Right, and this is kind of the classic example of being ignorant, the British being ignorant to local customs and beliefs because as you hopefully remember from last year, right, Hindus believe the cow is a sacred animal and they do not eat beef, and Muslims are not allowed to eat pork or pig, right? And so here now they are being exposed to these fats and animals that they're not supposed to be exposed to like this. And cartridges you kind of rip open, and traditionally, soldiers would do that with their mouths. So essentially they'd be touching to their mouth these animals. So they did not appreciate this. This was kind of seen as cultural ignorance, and it leads in 1857 to a rebellion. These Sepoy soldiers, these British East Indian Company employed Indian soldiers, rebel against the British East Indian Company, which causes the British to take greater control of India as a result in 1858. However, there are a growing sense of Indian nationalism throughout the 19th century. India does not gain their independence until after World War II. But there's some nationalist figures, and one kind of famous man is a man named Ram Mohan Roy, who was an Indian scholar who did support many Western reforms, but he also supported several Hindu traditions, right? Kind of taking the best of both worlds, so to speak. He was against the Hindu practice of purdah, which the Western reformers would have also been against, and that was the segregation of women and men, right? Them not really being able to interact with each other too much, or something he kind of saw as outdated, and he wanted to adopt some Western methods and ideas, but India should be kind of ruled by the Indians, was what Ram Mohan Roy believed. Eventually, throughout the 19th century, this growing sense of nationalism leads to the formation of the Indian National Congress, or the Congress Party, which still exists in India today as a political party. And this party promoted more equal representation in colonial government, right? That was the goal of this movement, this Congress, was to create greater equal representation in colonial government, meaning that there would be Indians doing meaningful work in the government that the British had there. They first met in 1885, and one of their ultimate goals was for self-rule or independence. The Congress Party was largely, overwhelmingly Hindu, and again, that is the majority population of India are Hindus. So kind of in response, many Muslim Indians formed what was called the Muslim League, and they would advocate for similar things, but from the Muslim Indian perspective, not the Hindu Indian perspective. Right, and just to end here, kind of this cool photograph of the Indian National Congress, and you can see an interesting blend here, right? You have some people who kind of adopted to Western norms, but this man over here are kind of wearing Western style clothing, but many of these people, as a nationalist group, right, wore traditional Indian garb, right, and kind of as a way of expressing their Indian nationalism. And this was a meeting of these Indian National Congress members.